Well, speaking of social media, Ireland are all smiles in Portugal. New Zealand tomorrow week is suddenly upon us. So there will be New Zealand Ireland fever all across next week as the build up starts. They are busy, the All Blacks, at the moment. So they play England on Saturday, 3:10. Then they have Ireland. Then they have France. And that's after a busy summer already. They have named their team for the England game if you're interested. Been quite a lot of debate in the New Zealand press over who is their best number 10 at the moment. Much like ourselves, it's a bit of an obsession. Bowden Barrett gets the nod at 10. Jordy Barrett, Rico Ioane centres, wings, Caleb Clark, Mark Talea, Will Jordan is at fullback. And then they have the likes of Sam Kane at 7, Artie Surveya at 8, Cody Taylor at hooker, Scott Barrett in the second row. It's a good team. Mackenzie is on the bench. Their form under Scott Robertson thus far, mixed is the way it's generally been talked about. Degree of rebuilding, goodbyes to the likes of Brodie Retallick and Sam Whitelock and Aaron Smith and these key figures of the last decade. On Saturday just gone, they beat Japan 64-19. And then September, they beat Australia home and away. They lost to South Africa twice, 18-12 in Cape Town and 31-27 in Johannesburg. But both of those games were close. New Zealand were brilliant in Johannesburg. They led until the closing moments, and South Africa resorted to some pick and go, blunt force trauma. And then in the Cape Town game as well, there was only a point in it until a late South African try. So they were good games. And in August, lastly, they were beaten by Argentina, but then won a week later. Ian, I might put to you Wayne Smith's comment about New Zealand, where he thinks they are. He said, "You can see the ball movement is wider than it's been. There's an intent to keep the ball alive, more in the tackle, so there's more continuity. To me, that's our DNA. We're not copiers. We don't need to play a detailed, over-structured game like a lot of teams around the world. We need to play our own game, and I'm now seeing that in this team." So the way they're being talked about is new coach, new imprint, not a new style of play, maybe returning to some roots a little bit, and their side building as opposed to finished article at the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting, and that's the second time I've heard that this week about, a team's identity. And the same was said about, Joe Schmidt as Australia coach, that, look, he's not coaching them in line with Australia's identity. Mauling from the 22, I think it was Campese came out and said it, and he's been quite outspoken with it. So it does matter, like, what style of play these countries have. Like, there's legacy there. There's generations that want to see their country playing a certain way, whether they win or lose. Sometimes comes secondary to the style of play itself. And that's what we associate with New Zealand. It's always been this expansive game, winning the contact, offloading rugby, not necessarily set piece that we'd associate with South Africa now, of like really strong scrum, more excellent pick and go game, good kicking game, the formula for success. But I love we're not copycats. That's go. Like, be your own man. Make it.
Who do you think he's talking about there? Who are the great copycats of world rugby?
Good question. It's hard to be too pointed on that, because like it could end up being quite the insult if I did name someone. But I'll tell you what, I have been in teams though that are copycats, and you end up being jack of all, master of none, and the game is always moving away from you. You, like, to be the best, you need to be able to create your own ideas and see them through. And you think back on, like, when Exeter had their success, like a team that's struggling now. Why did they have their success? Because they were nuanced in how they did the pick and go, nuanced in how they carried the ball off 9, the deception that they used there. Like, that's what. And would they have won European Cups or premierships without thinking outside the box and doing what no other team was doing? No, they wouldn't have. Would they have won it being a copycat? Certainly not. Being a copycat can get you like mid-table, can get you on a bit of a run of games, but you'll never win back-to-back league titles or European titles. Look at how Raj had La Rochelle playing, look at how Toulouse are playing. They have their identity. Look at how Leinster play. And you could argue that maybe Leinster lost their identity for a period of time, and they're winning it back now with that expansive style of rugby that you associate with them. I think for New Zealand, what's important to note is they don't have the quality individuals that they did have when you think back to Carter, McCall, Sonny Bill, Nanu, throughout their squad. So they have to play more like a team. When you've got those kind of individuals in your team, it's a case of just getting them the ball. Like when I played with Charles Piatow in Bristol, it was the most simple game plan. Just get that guy on the ball as many times as you can in a game.
Mm.
The more you get him on the ball, the probability of winning goes up significantly. Whereas if you don't have those kind of big game breakers, you've got to play more as a team.
And how do New Zealand talent levels compare to Irish talent levels, teams on paper?
Yeah, teams on paper is an interesting one, and it is subjective in the sense that you're kind of going, well, certain players play well with other players, so you can't just go, we'll take 5 New Zealand guys and we'll take 10 Irish guys. But you can also go through it and go, well, look, if you had to pick, who are you? Obviously, I'm taking the Irish front row. I'd take the Irish second row. I think in the back row, I think full credit to who's the New Zealand captain again? Sorry, his name's
Surveyor.
Surveyor.
Sam
Surveyor is
Kerr.
going to fit into somewhere in that back row. Like
Yeah.
maybe not ahead of Doris at 8, but maybe at 6 or
Yeah.
and then the halfbacks, Gibson Park is arguably the second best 9 behind DuPont in the world. Saying that, I like Roygaard and he will be very good. Looks like a fantastic player. At 10, on their days, Barrett and McKenzie, but when they go cold, they're very cold.
Mm.
And because Crowley doesn't quite have the experience, I'd go at 10. I'd go with a New Zealand 10 there. I'd go with both our centres in Aki and Ringrose. And I think we're a fair bit better than the likes of Leonard Brown or Ioane. And then in the back 3, I like Jordan. I'd fit Jordan in somewhere into the back 3.
Yeah.
And then I big fan of Lowe. And then at 15, I think it's close in the back 3. Keenan's obviously gone really well, but yeah, you'll either have 2 Irish or 2 Kiwis, but you could debate that all day long.
Yeah. So that works out very, very favorably and evenly as opposed to how it would have shaped up 15 years ago, to be fair.
Very much so. But I actually
Yeah.
think we've got a good edge there. And it's also important to note that we're picking the front 5, which is generally going to dictate who's going to win that game.
True. Although injuries at the moment obviously are reshaping our front row. So that may swing the game to an extent. Can I just ask, so just to jog memories, I don't know how applicable the South African games are to several months later, possibly not overly, but I was just trying to remind myself of the mood around those games. And certainly, obviously, the Kieran Frawley drop goal lives in the memory, and there was a great deal of great innovation from Ireland from set piece and attack. The 22 dropouts, they scored a couple of tries from, they were really good. The other two things which kind of linger in the memory, one, you might remember the Snyman tackle on Casey, and the subsequent week there was much talk of Ireland's body language and first principles, and let's actually kind of meet the physical challenge of South Africa. And then there were the bloody bodies in the first 10 minutes. Andy Farrell had shown them videotapes of their physical behavior during the week between test 1 and test 2. So that was a big theme of that week. The other thing I remember thinking, and it was sort of on foot as well, of even the Six Nations finale against Scotland at the Aviva. And I remember on the TV that day starting that conversation, is our team's really starting to get to grips with the Irish attack? Is it just starting to not have the punch that it had over the previous 18, 24 months? Now, again, not a crisis, not like it's gone off a cliff, just there's a lot of tape, there's a lot of games, a lot of coaches thinking about Ireland, just this sense that actually it might be time now for a little rejuvenation in attack. Do you agree with that? Is that something you're looking out for in a big way this November?
No, I don't agree with it. And
Okay.
the reason why I don't is because I'd still look at the Irish attack and go, well, what scoreboard accumulation of points have been accumulated from our attack? And like you think back to that South Africa game and like the restarts, the 22 restarts, that is still a set piece attack now. That's just as good as a scrum or a line out in the opposition half. And
I'm talking more in general phase play, I suppose.
yeah, if you're talking general phase play, yeah, look, other teams are catching up and the scout is so good. Ireland traditionally play off 9 off the touchline. They get to the 15s, they play through 10. They play a 3-pod system, typically playing the middleman. He's the option of tipping the ball inside or outside or pulling it back to the... And we saw, like, in the last phase of play in the World Cup, like, we saw that shape multiple times, and it's a shape that's been very good to Ireland over the years. Will we see it develop through this autumn series? I actually think we will. And like that, like when I look at those two tries that Ireland got from those 22 dropouts, how did they get them? They get them with deception with the forwards and interlinking forwards and backs, but not necessarily a forward pulling the ball back to a back and then playing off that. Like using the likes of Bundy Aki to be a strike runner through a forward pod, that's where I can see Ireland's attack moving forward too. So you've got deception of forwards and backs, but also mixing up who the strike runner is, not necessarily having the back as the ball player, but also using the back as a strike runner. And I think just a hunch that I have, if they can do that and do that well off those touchline rucks and those 15-meter rucks, that's where they can catch out and find those soft shoulders. And that's all you need at that international level. You just need to find those soft shoulders, give yourself the ability to offload the ball, get in behind the attack, and then you're on.
Then you're away.
But
Yeah,
if you
and
can't keep the game line, Joe, it's really difficult. Really.
Yeah, and to be fair, once they punch through, they tend to make things happen. To be fair to them, and what else are you looking out for then?
In the Irish attack.
Yeah, no, more generally. So that's attack. We'll watch that. Like for instance, the question now has been posed for a year: will Ireland adopt a little bit more of the Leinster rush defence? They haven't quite gone in that direction yet. For instance, are there certain personnel that you're really looking at and saying, I want to see, for instance, Prendergast put in a big 40 minutes or a Frawley? It doesn't have to be about 10, but in general terms, are there things that you're interested in next week and beyond?
Yeah, I'm always trying to look at it with the focus to the next World Cups and like what's it going to take and what personnel are we going to need in those positions to get us to win the World Cup in the next cycle. And I think to win it, you need to be defending the way Leinster are. And I think we're going to see Leinster are the first club team to be doing it really well. We've seen South Africa obviously do it and have good success with it. We've seen the difference in year one of Leinster's defence with Niambar, and year two, massive improvement. So why don't you start it now?
That is a big statement. To win the World Cup, you think Ireland would need to defend the way Leinster are?
Yeah.
Okay, explain that to us.
My reasoning behind that is we're not physically the biggest team. So if you're coming up against the likes of South Africa, who are going to be, you got to look at the teams who you're going to be competing with to win it, right? And France and South Africa and arguably England. Look, they're countries that are far more populous than Ireland, and naturally they produce bigger people. So you're going to have more powerful athletes. So how can you, if you defend anyway passively against those bigger teams over 80 minutes, they're going to get the edge on you. So you've got to be aggressive in how you defend. You've got to get off the line hard. You've got to get up with a high tail, and you've got to force their attackers back on the inside and be really organized with your defenders on those internal channels to slam them. And that's it. That would have me really excited with the Irish defense.
Interesting. Do you suspect the Irish coaching ticket are of a similar mindset?
I'd imagine so, yeah. And I'd also think that like the likes of Gary Ringrose and Robbie Henshaw and Gibson Park, who are at the centre of that Leinster defence, and even obviously the forwards as well, and in Doris, are saying, look, we're seeing great results with this. Look at these stats that we're now tracking. So like old stats that we used to track, like missed tackles and stuff, we don't really care a whole lot about them. These are the stats that we're now tracking. Is the opposition getting gain line success? Can we do back-to-back gain line successes for the defending team? And I think I have a hunch that the way Leinster are tracking all those defensive stats is completely different to the way it was 3 or 4 years ago. And I think they're going to be saying to Farrell, I think we should be going with this. And I'd imagine those conversations have happened already.
Wow, it's really interesting. Last one. Are you presuming it will be akin to that second test in South Africa? McCarthy and Ryan second row, Tyke Byrne at 6 with Van der Fleer and Doris. Is that the obvious solution in light of O'Mahony's absence, or no?
Yeah, with Conan out injured, McCarthy hasn't played yet this year, so he'll want to be training well over
Fair point. Maybe
So
does Henderson come in? I don't know, but
yeah, Henderson's also had his injuries as well. He had a nasty concussion in the Connacht
yeah,
game. So yeah, it's hard to piece that together without knowing what's going on behind the scenes. But I would stick with that. It worked
okay,
well.
okay,
Yeah, I wouldn't
okay,
change a whole lot. I still think it's hard to tell what he'll do with Osborne. Like he's played really well for Leinster this year. He was obviously brilliant in both tests in South Africa. So
yeah,
how he fits him in is a very interesting one. Maybe it's in the 23 slot. But yeah, that's one I'll be keeping a very close eye on.
okay. Well, I guess 4 games in a row, so there's going to be a lot of rotation.